In the earlier video we talked about the different symbols, we talked about the movie clip, we talked about graphic, and we didn't yet talk about buttons. What buttons do is they allow the user to have interactivity with your Flash movie. So we're going to select button, we're going to call it button 1, and we're going to make a very simple button. Okay, and we see here that the button has its own timeline. Once again, layer 1, we've got the up state, the over state, the down state, and the hit state. So I'm going to go ahead and create a very simple button, just an oval red button. We're going to go on to the up state is just basically the state that the button sits in. When you're playing your Flash movie, the mouse hasn't moved over it or hasn't pressed down on it. This is the state that the button's going to look like. So when we're playing the movie, we're going to have a red button sitting there, a red oval shape that's going to be acting as our button. So I'm going to go to the over, insert a keyframe on it, go to down, insert another keyframe, go to hit, and insert another keyframe there. The hit is actually invisible to the user, and it's the area that makes the mouse pointer where that mouse pointer will be active. So I'm going to go down, so it's kind of irrelevant what our hit looks like as long as we're covering the same area that the button is that we want to have active. So we're going to make the button go blue when we move the mouse over it. Just going to get the fill color to go blue, so I'm going to reselect that and select just maybe make it this kind of blue here. We've got the down state that I'm going to just do the same thing, select the fill area separately, and I'm going to just make it go yellow. And that's it for our button. We're going to go back to scene 1, place button 1 on our scene 1, and I'm going to go ahead and test the movie. We can see here, as I said, that when the button sits in your Flash movie, it's simply a red button and it just sits there. As soon as I move the mouse over, we've got the over state of the button. We can see that's gone blue. When I press on the button, which would be the down state, we can see that it goes yellow. And once again, when I move it off, it sits back and it's sitting red. Our hit area is invisible, but we know that we placed the hit area on the same dimensions as the button is, as the oval shape. So we know as soon as we come even close to moving it, we touch over the button area, it automatically goes to the over state. Now that we've created the button in Flash, we need to add some interactivity for the button. Interactivity is added with ActionScript, and what ActionScript is, it's a series of statements that execute certain tasks. Now you can place these actions or ActionScript either on keyframes, or you can place it as actions on different buttons here. So for this one, originally we're going to add a second layer, and we're just going to rename this one as our actions layer. And I'm going to select the first keyframe here. I can right click it and select actions from here, which is simply going to open up my actions window at the bottom of the screen. It's the same as what was sitting here earlier. We could just press the triangle and open that up. And as we can see, we've got a whole bunch of different actions that are available to us. We're going to be currently just going over the basics of what the actions are. And we've got the movie controls here, which I'm going to open up, and I'm going to select the action to stop. There's a go to, there's a play, there's stop, and stop all sounds. And simply select stop, close this down, and what's going to happen now, when the marker gets to, it's going to play layer 1, going to go to layer 2, it's going to play layer 2. In layer 2, it's going to see that there's an action calling it to stop. So it's going to play layer 1 and stop. Going to go to and test the movie and see what happens. Absolutely nothing. So we need to add in some different layers here, or different keyframes. The next keyframe I'm just gonna add in a separate layer here for what we want to happen when we press the button. And what I want to happen, I'm gonna have this oval shape, and what I'm gonna do with it, we're gonna motion tween it across to another keyframe here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that. I'm going to modify it and group it together. Select keyframe number 5. Insert another keyframe there. And I'm going to go to the properties. Select motion to create a motion tween for it. And as we can see now, we got to move it over a little bit here. So as we can see now, layer 1, it's there and it moves across. For the button, I don't need to add in a keyframe to give it the actions all the way across, because I'm not going to make any changes on it. It's going to stay the same. So I'm just going to enter a simple frame. And we can see that what's going to happen now when I play it, we're going to be able to see that absolutely nothing happens. Because if you remember, the order that's going in, it comes to layer 1 and it draws what's on layer 1 here. It draws our button, it draws the title here, buttons, and that's it. It comes to, which is layer 3 right now, and we see an oval shape, draws the oval shape, goes to the top here layer, and reads that this layer is asking it to stop. So it follows the action script in it and stops the movie playing. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in some actions on our button here. I'm going to select the button, and I'm going to either select actions over here, or I could right click it, select actions, and I'm going to select on. So I've got a few options here for the button. We can see that on performs actions when a particular mouse event occurs. So because I've selected the button, I'm able to select these particular events for it. And I'm going to select on press. I want this movie to go to and play frame number 2. And close that back down. So now I've got my actions set for my button. I'm going to go ahead and test the movie once again, and we can see that nothing's happening. I'm going to go over on top of the button, over the button, it's changed color but nothing's happening. And we can see as soon as I pressed down on it, it went ahead and it played the next frame. Press down on the button and it plays the next frame, which in frame number 2, we're just going to close this, and we can see that in the movie I went on top of the button, I pressed down on the button, and my action for this was telling the movie to continue playing from frame number 2. So go to and play frame number 2. So that's what it did. It's ended up on frame number 2 where it drew all of the button, it drew the buttons here, and it drew the yellow or the oval shape here in this area. There was nothing to tell it to stop, so it went ahead and it played frame number 3, went ahead and played frame number 4, went ahead played frame number 5, then effectively it looped back to frame number 1. It did all of the functions of frame number 1, and it got caught up here again at the actions, which was telling it to stop. Until I went over the button, I pressed the button again, and it continued with the sequence of starting on frame 2, playing 3, 4, 5, and looping back to frame number 1. So we'll just see that once again, the way that the action script is working, that once we press on the button, it goes ahead and plays all the frames that it's asked to, starting with frame number 2, and there's nothing to stop it from completing the loop back to frame number 1, where it effectively stops back on the button. We're going to go a little bit further with our simple action script and select frame number 5, insert just a blank frame, and we're going to see that this actually doesn't make much of a difference in the movie's play by itself, that we're still able to press the button and it moves along starting at frame 2, moves along all the way to frame 5. Now we're going to edit some of the actions on the button to make it perform a little bit differently. As we see, we've got on press, go to, and play to. We're going to change that to go to and stop. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the toolbar here so we can see it a little bit better. When using Flash, it's always suggested to change your screen size to more pixel width, so you're able to see the Flash screen a little bit better. But we're just going to do it this way, so we're able to see our full action area here. We've got a little icon here that we can select, and it opens us up to use normal mode and expert mode. Expert mode is actually if you're just going to be typing the actual script itself. It's much more difficult and easier to make errors when using expert mode, because you're just simply typing in the script by itself and you don't have the guidelines that you do in the normal mode. We're able to go to a certain line, find, we're able to replace. If we've got a certain word, we can replace it with what we want to replace it with, match the case. We've got an area where we can check the syntax. So we see that this script contains no errors when we check our script syntax. We've got an auto format options. We've got an area where we can import the script from a file. We can export the script as a file if we want to save it separately from the actual Flash movie, use it later on. We can print it. We can view the line numbers so we can keep track better of what's going on. We can view the shortcuts if we wanted to do. We can, just going to undo that. You can see that the view shortcuts, we have an area here where we've got the different shortcuts that are showing up here. So we don't really need to have those right now guiding us. So I'm going to get rid of that. We've got a preferences area where we can edit our preferences. We've got the ActionScript editor, the automatic indentation, the code hints, delay, tab size. We've got the text that it's being displayed in, the size, the syntax coloring, and we're able to reset it to defaults. We've got a choice to configure our warnings. We've got a clipboard area where we can configure that. We can edit our pen tool, our vertical text, our drawing settings, our general here. We've got a whole bunch of different options that we can configure. I'm not going to play around too much with that, but going back to the ActionScript, I'm going to cancel that. And we've got a help and a maximize panel, which the panel is currently maximized. So this is why I got rid of the toolbar area, so that we could access this area here. We've got a pin current script where we're able to see, we're able to navigate to other scripts if we've got more than one action script available, which we do, and we can see that. Currently we've got the button 1 selected, and this tells us which action script we're working on. We've got an actions for frame number 1 layer name actions, which was over here, and we've got actions for frame number 1 layer number 1, so we've got the actions for there. So if we want to, we could switch over and we can see that there are no actions currently there. We can see the actions for the frame number 1 and actions layer that it's stop. I'm going to go back to the button right now. We see that we're on the button right now, and that we've got a reference area here where we can select it, and we can select the different meanings. We can find definitions, how it works. Sometimes there's an example of how to write the specific action script. We're able to adjust this area here where we've got information that pops up about what it is. If we select it, we see that on performs actions when a particular mouse event occurs. We can get rid of that if we want, or we can have that if we want. Usually it's better to have it. Here we've got the plus or minus sign where we're able to add an item or delete an item from the script. We've got some simple quick keys here for finding, for replacing, and if we want to insert a target path, if it was available for us, we'd be able to do that. Here we've got for debugging, we've got some options here. We can set a breakpoint, remove breakpoints, or we could remove all the breakpoints. And we've got a different mode settings here: normal mode, expert mode, and view line numbers. So we've got a lot of the same features as we did here when we press this icon over here. And in the bottom here we see that we've got line number 1 on press. It shows us the exact line. If we've got any errors with the syntax, it'll show up in red. We can see that line number 2 and line number 3. So this one is okay, line number 1 is fine on press. The second one, what we're going to do, we've got some options. We can go to and play, or we can go to and stop. So I'm going to select go to and stop. We're able to quickly select the different scenes. We can have current scene, next scene, previous scene, scene 1. So as you remember, we talked about earlier about the different scenes. So right now we're just working with one scene, which is the current scene, and which would be the first scene. But if you wanted this button to play something in a totally different scene, you could set it like this. The type is by frame number. We can automatically just go to and stop at the next frame, which I'm going to select now, and we're no longer required to enter a frame number. So I'm going to shut this down, and we're going to go to and we're going to test the movie. And what's going to happen every time I press the button, what it's doing, it's following the action script that we've laid out for it, which is to go to and stop on the next frame, and that's exactly what it's doing. So as soon as I press the button, go to and stop next frame, frame number 4. Go to and stop next frame, frame number 5. Go to and stop next frame. So right now we've hit the end of our timeline and we've got no next frame because the loopback doesn't count as the next frame. So we've got no other frames to go to. That's why our movie now has come to a standstill. When we're using the action script, we can actually even refer to, instead of numerically, we can actually give each frame a name, and we can set it to go to and play a certain frame, whatever the name might be. In order to name a frame, I'll open up another area here, and I'm going to select the first keyframe. So this is still frame number 1. I can go to properties, and I see that I've got keyframe number 1 selected in layer 4, doesn't matter which layer, and I can name the frame. So I'm going to name it as frame number 1 and enter, and we can see that automatically we see over here on our timeline that frame number 1 has popped up. When we move our mouse over it, we see that the label frame number 1 is now sitting here, and we're able to actually select it from our actions in our action script. We can go to and we can play the frame label, and we're going to play frame label number 1. Oh wait, actually we named it numerically, so gotta go back and fix that slight error there. So it's frame number 1. So instead of like this, we're calling it frame number 1. Just check if that's correct, and gonna go to and test the movie, and we're gonna go to. So now what's happening when we're pressing the button is automatically going to and playing the frame which is labeled number 1, and in this frame we've got this oval shape sitting here on the left hand side. So our button actually has lost much of its effect that it was able to do before. If I take this frame, I can select it over here on the timeline, pressing down on the mouse, holding the mouse key down. I can drag it over one frame over here. So frame number 1 is going to be blank now, and actually frame number 2 is going to be labeled frame number 1. So making it a little bit complicated here, but we're going to go to and we're going to test the movie, and we see what happens when we press the button, and it's going to still play the frame number 1. Sometimes labeling the frames makes it easier to find them or to identify them. If you've got a huge movie, flash movie that you've made with a whole bunch of different scenes, a whole bunch of different frames, it's sometimes easier to find when the frames are labeled. Just like over here, when the layers are labeled in the ActionScript, it's easier to identify them and to find them. So we're able to see, other than using the defaults that they have, we're able to have one for actions, another one might be for the buttons, another one might be for our background, or for any kind of motion or movement that we're going to be having, or tweening. And depending on how we've set up our movie, the best idea is, although, to label them all separately so it's easier to judge what you have on it. Because once you've got, a good 10 layers here, it does get confusing to what you're using which layer for.